It arrived on a Tuesday morning. 1 page, bureaucratic language, the kind of memo that normally gets filed without a second glance. But the people who read it that morning didn't file it. They read it twice, then a third time, and then they looked at each other across their desks with the particular expression of people who have just understood that something has changed permanently and that nobody is going to explain it to them directly. The memo concerned Queen Camilla's household, her financial allocations, her travel arrangements, her staffing budgets, the entire administrative infrastructure that allowed her office to function as the office of a queen consort. All of it suspended, pending review, no timeline, no context, no name except in the authorization line at the bottom. The name belonged to the office of the Prince of Wales. William had signed it. By 9 that morning, the palace had taken on a specific quality of silence, the kind that royal households produce when something genuinely significant has happened, and nobody has been told they're allowed to speak about it. Camilla was not there. A routine charitable appearance, something low profile and easy, had been on her diary for that morning. It was canceled, not rescheduled, canceled. The organization received a brief note citing scheduling conflicts and no alternative date. Her office door remained closed past 8 o'clock. It was never closed at 8. A member of her household arrived to collect her morning correspondence from the tray outside her private rooms. The tray sat untouched. She always took them herself. In 20 years, she had never left them sitting. To understand why the memo existed, you have to go back 6 weeks. A message was passed through an intermediary, not through official channels, not through any of the formal systems that leave records, require acknowledgments, or pass, through private secretaries trained to document everything. The message moved through a retired equerry, a man who had spent 3 decades in and around royal service, who knew both households in the way that only long proximity produces, and whose name meant nothing to the public, but carried in the relevant circles exactly the weight of someone trusted precisely because he'd never given anyone reason not to trust him. The message was simple. Andrew Parker Bowles was requesting a private audience with the king. Not logged. No entry in the official diary. No staff present. No record beyond whatever the 2 men chose to carry out of the room themselves. In a household where nearly every interaction involving the king passes through at least one layer of documentation, this request was unusual enough that the equerry apparently paused before delivering it, not from reluctance, from an awareness that once handed across, it couldn't be retrieved. Charles agreed to the meeting. Those who learned of it afterward described his agreement as something between reluctance and inevitability, as though he had understood, from the specific nature of the request and the specific identity of the man making it, that whatever Andrew had been carrying, he had now decided he could no longer carry alone. The meeting took place on a Wednesday afternoon, a private address in the countryside, not a royal residence, not a club, the home of the retired equerry himself, made available with the kind of discreet generosity that old networks produce without needing to discuss. What Andrew said in that room stayed in that room. But what Charles looked like when he returned that evening was something his staff would remember. Not shaken, not angry, something harder to name than either of those things. The look of a man who had just been handed something he recognized, something he had been hoping for or a very long time that he would never have to hold. He canceled dinner that night. A small thing, easily explained. A king's schedule shifts constantly. But those who knew his habits understood that the evening meal, taken privately, but with at least one staff member present, was the one consistent rhythm he protected, regardless of what the day had brought. He hadn't canceled it in recent memory. He canceled it that night. He didn't summon her through the usual channels. No message through a private secretary. No diary entry. No formal notation of the kind that transforms a private conversation into an institutional record. He simply sent word through a single member of staff, who was given nothing to write down, that he wished to speak with her that afternoon. The informality was itself the signal. She came within the hour. The room Charles had chosen was one they both knew. A smaller sitting room on the upper floor, used for conversations that required distance from the working areas of the household. No desk position to establish authority, no chairs arranged to manage the power between 2 people. Just a room and 2 people in it, and a single document on the low table between them that Charles had placed there before she arrived. He hadn't touched it since. Camilla looked at the document before she looked at him. It was a single sheet, a photocopy, bearing a date from the period immediately following her divorce from Andrew, years before her marriage to Charles had been contemplated in any formal sense. What the document described was a private financial arrangement entered into during that period, an agreement suggesting she had used knowledge acquired through her proximity to royal circles, knowledge she had no official standing to possess at that time, as a form of leverage in a negotiation that was on its surface entirely private, not in isolation a matter with legal consequence, but a document that, in the hands of anyone with the context to understand what it described, told a story about judgment, about the relationship between private conduct and public trust, about what a person had been willing to do at a moment when no one was watching, in the years before the world began watching her very closely indeed. Charles asked her one question, not an accusation delivered with the weight of certainty, a question shaped with the careful precision of a man who had spent 6 weeks deciding exactly how to hold what he'd been given. He asked her to help him understand what the arrangement had been. The silence that followed lasted long enough that its length became its own kind of answer. When Camilla finally spoke, she didn't deny the document. She didn't challenge its authenticity. She reframed it. The arrangement had been mischaracterized, she said. The context had been lost. What appeared on the page as leverage was, in her telling, nothing more than a private negotiation between two people untangling a complicated shared life. The knowledge she had used was no more privileged than anything two people accumulate simply by moving through the same world. Charles listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he didn't respond to what she had said. He asked about Andrew instead. Specifically, he asked whether she had any understanding of why Andrew had chosen to bring this forward now, after so many years of having chosen not to. The question settled in the room, and Camilla, who had spent decades learning to navigate the precise terrain between what is said and what is meant inside this family, made the one response that told Charles everything the document alone had left uncertain. She didn't say what Andrew had shown him was untrue. She asked why he would do this to her. The meeting ended without resolution. Charles didn't tell her what he intended to do. He offered no reassurance. He didn't reach for the document on the table when she left. The paper stayed exactly where he'd placed it before she arrived. Within 48 hours, the palace's internal financial review office had received new instructions. Not through Camilla's household. Not through any channel that would have given her office formal notification of what was being set in motion. Through the king's private secretary, addressed to the keeper of the privy purse. A comprehensive review of all expenditure associated with the queen consort's office over the preceding 3 years. The keeper had served in his role long enough to understand that a request arriving through this channel, without prior discussion and without accompanying explanation, was not routine. He asked 2 questions when he received it. The first concerned the scope of the review. The second concerned who else had been informed. The answer to the second question was the one that told him everything the memorandum itself had not said. William had been included, not notified after the fact, not briefed as a courtesy, included, present in the initial conversation from which the memorandum had emerged. His office copied on the instructions, his name in the authorization chain in a position that placed him not as an observer, but as a participant in directing it. In 20 years of royal financial administration, the keeper could not recall a precedent for the Prince of Wales occupying that position in a matter involving the Queen Consort's household. The changes began quietly. They always do inside a royal household, not with announcements or statements or formal communications, with small, observable alterations to the ordinary texture of daily life. 3 of Camilla's scheduled engagements were removed from her diary. The organizations involved received brief communications from her office citing scheduling conflicts. None of them were given alternative dates. A scheduling conflict that produces no rescheduling is not a scheduling conflict. 2 members of her household office were quietly reassigned. Their desks were cleared over a single weekend. Their building access was adjusted the following Monday morning. When colleagues asked, they were told only that both individuals had been moved to support roles in other departments. The official website updated the language around her patronages. The changes were subtle enough that most readers wouldn't have noticed. Active, present tense descriptions were softened into language that referenced her historical association. Ongoing replaced by long-standing. Present tense quietly replaced by past. The kind of editorial shift a communications team makes when it has been told to create distance without being told to explain why. Then came the letter from the keeper of the privy purse. It placed an administrative hold on the accounts associated with Camilla's household operations. Not a freeze in any legal sense. A hold. The distinction existed on paper. In practice, the effect was identical. The accounts through which her office had managed its day-to-day expenditure were no longer accessible without additional authorization that only one office could now provide. William's office. One final meeting remained. Unlike everything that had come before it, this one hadn't been arranged through intermediaries or managed through institutional protocol. William had asked to see her directly. She was already in the room when he arrived, seated by the window, the afternoon light behind her, the full length of the room between herself and the chair he would take. A small arrangement that communicated nothing openly and everything to anyone paying attention. William sat. He placed nothing on the table between them. No documents, no files, no visible evidence of the weeks of work that had preceded this moment. He had made a deliberate decision to bring none of it into the room. The absence of those materials was its own statement. He spoke first. He said he hadn't asked to meet in order to revisit the EVI, dense or deliver further institutional consequence or continue an argument that neither of them had formally begun. He had asked to see her because there was something he needed her to understand that no memorandum and no financial review could communicate. Something that existed for him beneath the level of institution entirely. He told her about the quality of silence he remembered most from his childhood, not the silence of conflict. He had been too young for much of it to comprehend as conflict. What he remembered was the other silence, the particular quiet of a woman who had learned over years that the institutions surrounding her would not amplify her voice regardless of what she placed inside them. Who had understood that the protection she had been led to expect was conditional in ways never made explicit, who had carried that understanding alone because there was nowhere inside that world to put it without cost. He was not equating the situations. He said that clearly. Camilla, who had been watching him with an expression that gave away very little, gave away something at that. A slight shift in the set of her shoulders. The particular adjustment of a person who had prepared for one kind of conversation and has just understood they are in a different one. He said only that he had watched what silence protected in this institution, and what it cost the people it was meant to protect, and that he had decided, at some point he could not precisely identify, that he was not willing to extend that silence simply because extending it was easier than the alternative. Camilla didn't respond immediately. When she spoke, what she said stayed in that room. William didn't repeat it. Neither did she. Whatever passed between them in the minutes that followed was theirs entirely. The door opened 20 minutes after it had closed. William left first. Camilla remained seated by the window for a while longer. Outside, the palace continued its afternoon in the ordinary way, a household purse, forming its rhythms, a family carrying what families carry in the spaces between those rhythms. Andrew Parker Bowles was never publicly connected to any of it. His name circulated for a few weeks, carried by the momentum of public curiosity, then faded back into the comfortable periphery where he had always existed, having done what he decided to do, having left the consequences entirely to the people better positioned to manage them. What remained when the noise settled was something without a clean name, not quite rupture, not quite resolution. The specific condition a family arrives at when something true has finally been said that cannot be unsaid, and all of them must now build whatever comes next on ground that has permanently shifted beneath them. The palace doors didn't close behind her, they simply opened less often, and in the quiet spaces the royal family has always used to carry what it cannot say aloud, that distinction turned out to matter less than anyone had imagined, and more than anyone was prepared to say. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Andrew Parker Bowles did the right thing? Or should some secrets stay buried regardless of what they contain? Drop your honest take in the comments. This is the kind of story where your perspective genuinely matters. If this video gave you something you haven't found anywhere else, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet, because we go to places most royal coverage doesn't. See you in the next one.